what is the meaning of life? Or is it what makes life meaningful? Are we affected by what we see in our past? Or by what we can't see in our future? Is anxiety or depression the cause? Or are they just the effects? Hello, everybody. Welcome to Thinking Out Loud Live, where we discuss different aspects of usually mental health and entrepreneurship. This is made possible by Start Day One, which is a nonprofit foundation for mental health and suicide prevention, where we have just a more proactive approach to helping people rather than reactively waiting for mental health issues or suicidal tendencies. So anyway, today we have a guest, and we're going to be discussing more about happier relationships by actually getting rid of arguments. But basically, he's a relationship expert that's going to discuss how you can have a happier relationship. So I'd like to introduce you guys to Tim Kellis. Hey, how are you, Tim?
Ricardo, very well. Quite the intro. I love that. Is depression a cause or an effect? That is such a pivotal question. Exactly.
Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate that. So I didn't even give you a quick line for the people here. So if you could, I'd like when people hear directly from the guests. So if you could just kind of explain a little bit of your story, and why we're even talking, right? And then we'll go from there and we'll start talking from there.
Actually, I do not have a psychology background, and that turns out to be important. I actually have an engineering degree and an MBA, and I was the first semiconductor analyst on Wall Street to focus on the communications market. And the reason why I say that as my intro is I'm very analytical. Engineers are taught to solve problems, and it was a relationship of mine that didn't work out. One that was supposed to go the distance. We were supposed to spend the rest of our lives together. But more importantly, to be honest with you, Ricardo, when the therapist wasn't helping, and I realized that, is when I realized my fate in life, my mission in life was to solve this problem. I actually spent almost 2 years researching and writing my book, and it will change the direction of marriages in this country. I am going to lower the divorce rate in this country. What I basically do, and again, I'll just kind of start with this, is I address marriages mentally. What people are going to hear today, probably for the first time for most people, is marriages explained and understood from a mental perspective. And when you do it that way, it becomes a lot clearer to understand how to make one successful.
Yeah, that's perfect. Wait, well, I'm already on board, as you know, because everything I believe, even with entrepreneurship, when I talk to people about that everything stems from your mindset. That refers to your relationships, your job, startups, everything you do. That's just an extension of yourself, right? So I totally believe that. So let's go through a little bit about let's go to the problem, right? Let's go back to your relationship and things like that. Like, what actually happened? How long are you guys together? I just want to get a better story on that.
Well, it was actually a girl that I had known for 8 years. I lived in Dallas for like 10 years. But she always had a boyfriend and I always had a girlfriend. We connected one time when neither of us had boyfriends or girlfriends. And it was through a mutual friend of ours. In fact, it was really funny because I had known her for so long, and my friend said she was asking about you. And I had a whole nother story. She was doing something for me. I ran into her a few months earlier, and he looks at me and goes, "No, she was asking about you." And it was the first time that my eyes actually opened up to this girl, beautiful girl, very outgoing. She's like the social elite in Dallas, Texas. She knows everybody in Dallas, and she was just this personality and beautiful looks, and just it was great. And we connected immediately. That's what's so interesting about relationships that work. Because when they work, in fact, I explain the whole dynamics that takes place when couples first meet. But it's so interesting when it works. And two people come together, and it's like the easiest thing that you've ever done. You have the same interest, and you're getting to know each other. You could talk on the phone for hours. I mean, I was working on Wall Street, and I was commuting between New York and Dallas during our relationship. And the month I was off, we would talk on the phone for hours. I mean, you get to know each other very quickly. In fact, you do what I call character research.
Yeah.
Which is basically your background. although I'll tell you that the industry calls it the false facade. You put your best foot forward, as you should. You're trying to impress each other. But when two people come together as quickly as we did, it's fireworks go off, and it was really awesome. And in fact, I have it described in my book, Our First Fight. I mean, just this beautiful relationship, getting along, very close, all the phone, talking, always together. And we were going on a trip with about 19 of us to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. And there were about 8 of us at the airport, and we all had our luggage together, and we were all sitting around our luggage. And she looks at me and she goes, "I'm gonna go to the bathroom." So she walks off to the bathroom, and I've traveled my whole adult life, and one of the things I always do in the airport is I always go to the magazine rack. I'm always scanning. So the magazine rack is literally right across the hallway from where everybody's sitting. So I walk over to the magazine rack, and she comes back and sees I wasn't by the luggage. Okay. And it hit the fan. Well, you said you're going to be, but but I just, and it was, and I'll never forget it. We almost went back home. We almost did not go on that trip. And that was the first fight that we had. And I remember it with such clarity because I remember how uncomfortable it was. Now I'm 36, 37. I'm not a young guy. I've got a good memory, and I remember this, so vividly. And that just was the beginning of this process that we went down, where we just started fighting more and more every day. And I am not judgmental. It's not in my nature. I am an engineer. I'm a problem solver, and there was a problem. Obviously, there was a problem. Right. And then, it just kept getting worse and worse, and more fighting and more fighting. And then we went to the therapist. And let me back up a second. The only reason why I can comfortably and confidently tell anybody that I have solved the marriage problem is because I forgave my parents when I was 25. Okay. Little did I know at the time that not only, I assumed, we know what assume means. I assumed everybody goes through this. It was so, eye-opening and enlightening, and it's just more of an awareness of me and who I was going through that experience of letting go of my childhood. Little did I realize at the time that is the missing puzzle piece in the psychology industry. That is our first step to maturity as an adult. And I didn't realize at the time how profound that experience was, because we went to a therapist. I'm like, just get her to forgive her parents like I did. Those stories, right? And he would not address it. He would not address it.
It's so funny. I've gone through that conversation with so many people because about solving problems. I tell people all the time, like, when you're trying to solve a problem, you got to make sure you're looking at the cause, not the result. Right. Because if you're just looking at solving the result, well, there's going to be multiple ways to do that, but the cause is still there. And it actually goes back to like something from the past. And a lot of times, the 2 biggest things that really, really messes people up are something from the past is regret and resentment. Those are the 2 biggest ones that really take a toll. And that's the biggest thing, is the forgiveness.
Self-esteem, abandonment. When we could put a laundry list together of, and what's so interesting about that, there are as many ways of defining a problem as there are people on the planet. I mean, but what you just said, Ricardo, and this is very important to understand for people, because if they realize this in their marriage, it will take them a long, long way in going in the right direction. To define a problem without discussing a solution is being judgmental. Think about that for a second. If you and I are sitting there going, "You screwed up. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. This is what I did. This is what you did. This is what I did. This is what you did." So what? Right. What are we going to do about it? What is the next step in this? Couples get so stuck in that it's not my fault, it's your fault mindset. But then you get into the whole psychology and the fear, all the things motivate. It's funny. Oh, you're kind of breaking up a little bit, but it's funny. I tell that to people. So there's people, when they're in a bad place, they tend to complain. They love to blame. I've learned that when you're in a really negative mindset, you tend to kind of love excuses and hate accountability. It's not your fault. It's the other person's fault all the time.
And no matter what, basically what I tell people is like, hey, they got to release whatever they got to do. And then the question that you have to ask next is, well, now what? Because now what changes your perspective from going to why me, why this, what's going on here, whose fault it is. Just start looking for the solutions already. All right, I get it. You have all these issues that you're talking about, but now what? Like, what is the solution? We have to find that. And until you kind of ask that question, it's like, it becomes like, well, you're just complaining. You're not even looking for a solution whatsoever, right?
Well, I'm going to tell you what the solution is.
Go.
A balanced ego is not when you're better than anybody else. It's when you're better than you used to be. And what I'm saying with that statement, if I hadn't forgiven my parents, I would still define myself from what they said about me. Okay, this is the point. What I'm saying in that saying is that I'm the only one that defines myself. And again, I'm going to be funny here, Ricardo. I'm not serious. But if I do something to upset you, I'm really sorry. But I'm not trying to. But no. My point is, if you were to start yelling at me, it doesn't affect me. It doesn't affect me. You don't define me. I mean, I'm not trying to upset you. I'm a moral person. When you live a moral life, and people, but I might say something that upsets you. This is what happens all the times in relationships. But when you have a stable foundation for knowing who you are, other people don't define you, and then you're calmer. Because what happens? In fact, I love the Hollywood example. The reason why Hollywood celebrities are so messed up is because everybody else defines them. The public, their definition is their looks and their money based on the way other people see them, not the way they see themselves. Okay, the celebrities that have their head on straight are the ones that doesn't matter. I got a bad review. I loved the movie. I was into it. I was passionate. I thought it had a good message. Got a bad review. Didn't make any money. What is it about the making the money part or doing the passion part, right?
Yeah.
And that's the way people have to look at it. Is people have to understand that they are the only ones that define themselves, and they can't let other people define them. So when you're being judgmental, it's because you are worried what the other person thinks about you, because that's where you get your identity from, and that is a foundation of sand that's always moving, and that's why people get to be mentally unstable when they look outside of themselves to define who they are.
Yeah, which was amplified by social media.
Of course. Yeah.
Right. Because you always
Real Housewives of Beverly Hills and all of these other, Hollywood influences on us, all this stuff.
Right. Yeah, and it's funny when you were talking about the forgiveness thing. I just want to go back to that. Like I said, it's one of the biggest things that I've seen people get involved in that really causes their mental health. So there's two ways you can't move forward. One is because something is holding you back, regret, resentment, things like that. And then another is the ability to take the risk, to put your foot forward. So that's why you're not moving forward, right? Because you're just not taking that step. And it's funny with regret, I only realized it's probably like, I don't know, 3-4 years ago or whatever. What I realized was like, can you really live a life without regret? Like, is that really possible? And I was just like thinking about what regret is. And what I realized what regret is about, basically, there are just personal experiences, because you can't regret something for someone. Never happens. It's something that you experienced yourself that happened that you never really forgave yourself about. That's all regret is. When you forgive yourself, basically it's you're going to say, I coulda, woulda, shoulda. Tim, you didn't. Forgive yourself, And the same thing with resentment, right? It's like it's someone else now. Resentment is basically for someone else. You hate them for something. They did this to you. It's their fault. That's why you're poor today, and that's why I'm messed up. I can't keep a relationship because my dad, my mom, whatever. Something happened in the past. Forgive them. just forget them. Because until you do that, it's always going to be keeping you from moving forward. And that's going to be very difficult. And that's why actually, our clothing line, this is actually our clothing line. Our motto is to inspire people to make the decision to live life without regret and accept the challenges that are worth the risk. Like, that's the only way you're going to move forward, right? So when you were getting your relationship, so when you decided to pursue this, was it right after the breakup? Was it a couple of months? When did you go like, all right, what happened there? Like, were you just so confused? Like, what happened?
I couldn't live with myself until I started moving forward with this. This was the only way I could mentally handle the situation. It's so interesting, and I say that from a devastating perspective, that when people split up, they lose identity with each other. They no longer keep up with each other. You know, you're so used to having your friend next to you, and you're talking
Mhm.
and you're doing this and doing, and you're keeping up with each other. You're interested in each other. You're calling. You're keeping in touch. And then obviously, when a breakup happens, the loss of that relationship it can be quite suffocating. And for
Mhm.
me, because I guess I'm pretty emotional kind of guy. For me, it was so devastating that the only thing that my mind could do, I started reading immediately. I read 100 books over a 10-month period. That's 10 books a month, 2.5 books a week over
Yeah,
10
yeah,
months. And then I moved down to Costa Rica, where I spent 10 months writing the book. It was the only
wow.
way that I can mentally get through this myself. Because,
Yeah,
working on
yeah,
Wall Street, I'm considered an expert on Wall Street in both the semiconductor industry and the communications industry. I could spend the next 2 hours telling you how your phone works. I won't, but I could. But the point is I realized that I had a special skill set
yeah, yeah. And you
with
just
the
took
Wall
advantage
Street
of it, basically.
background to be able to analyze. I approached it. When people hear what I have to say, they hear a Wall Street analyst's approach to marriage. It is so conclusive, so expansive,
Yeah,
so all encompassing, and it's the way. Well, I mean, if you read my research papers that I published on this industry, I follow from the beginning and who developed and what developed and influence and all that stuff. The
yeah,
same thing I do here, and
yeah,
understanding the psychology industry from that depth. And let me tell you, the psychology industry was a very interesting industry to figure out, and I'm not saying that as a compliment.
yeah,
One of my objectives is to finally move the psychology industry into the 21st century. I want to make it so that people get real mental health when they understand what you and
yeah,
I are talking about and the effect of what you and I are saying needs to happen in order
yeah.
for people to be able to live with themselves. Because here's what you were just describing. Okay, enlightenment comes at a price. You have to give up your limitations.
Hmm.
Misery loves company. It's easy. You're such a jerk. I could live in that mindset and get comfortable in that mindset
Yeah,
and just sit
yeah,
there and spend all my time ruminating on all the things that Ricardo did wrong and how big of a jerk he was and how
right.
mean he was and how all these. I could live that life, and that is
Yeah,
limiting. Now I'm spending my time getting mad at you as opposed to, inventing the
yeah,
next whatever and moving forward in my life, because life is about moving forward. What we're
yeah,
doing is we're taking people and getting them to move their heads around 180 degrees to look
yeah.
forward, not
Right.
backwards.
Right. And it's funny when you mentioned before, that's something that I learned from breakups and basically any kind of loss with people and stuff like that. What I've learned is like, it's really the bond that you've had, right, with
Mhm.
someone. And when you lose that, you feel like you lost a piece of yourself because they were the only evidence or proof that that experience, that moment actually happened. So when you lose your boys, or your dad or something, it's like, whoa, I'm no one knows that I went fishing this one day, or no one knows, like, oh my God, we hooked up with this
Yeah,
freaking
but
girl,
Ricardo,
and it just
Ricardo,
disappears, right?
hang on a second though. Hang on a second,
Yeah.
because when you are describing that to me, I'm thinking logically.
Hmm.
We got to do this. I'm talking about the emotional breakdown. I'm
Yeah.
talking about I mean, this is not a brother. It's not a parent. This is a woman that I was in love with, that I was going to spend the rest of my life with, grow old
Yeah.
together with, raise children together.
Well,
I had this love for this woman
yeah,
that
yeah.
was going to change my life. Us together, 1 + 1 is so much bigger than 2. And when you
Right.
realize when you're working together as a partnership, how much greater things are going to be for you as a couple. And then I had
Right.
to separate from that. It was emotional. It was.
Yeah. Well,
I
one of the
understand
things.
you're right. Logically, I miss her. She was there when I did this, but I'm talking the
Right.
emotional pain is
Yeah, yeah,
unbelievable.
oh, totally. Well, that's why there's emotional pain, is because of that
Yeah.
loss. So you have to go through the process, right? Denial,
Right.
anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. Until you
Exactly.
accept it, you're going to go into this miserable states of
Oh,
mind, right? And sometimes you keep going back and forth after you accept it. And one of the things I use, as much as the future mindset is valuable, it could be very devastating if you can't see a good future. So what I've
right.
learned, when people have the even fear, anxiety, depression, anything at all that's a negative or actually even the positive emotions, is based on the future. It's not really what happened in the past. So when you break up with someone, it's not because like, oh, I'm gonna miss this so much. You do, I get that. But what's more important is really what gets you depressed is that you can't see a different future. Because you got so stuck in this blueprint that like, well, we were supposed to have white picket fence, pet, children, and then you can't go, no, there's someone else out there for me. And because of that, you're just in this turmoil. So you go back and go, how do I fix this?
Right.
And it's just like, yeah, but all you got to do is fix this. Because when I've told people before, right? Let's say they're unhappy, they're in a breakup. If you had broken up and I said like, hey, Tim, I'm from the future. I'm telling you right now, in 5 years, you find a hotter one and a smarter one and so in love with you that you're going to be so happy, right? All of a sudden, you're going to go, no shit.
Okay.
Really? That you won't even go through that. That you won't even go through that because you're like, really? And then you have this different future. So your actions, your behaviors, just automatically, because you see a different feature, because people don't get so depressed because of what they can see from the past. It's what they can't see about their future. Right?
Yeah, but the thing you have to include in that conversation is how that thought process got started in the beginning. And this is what I'm talking about. When you meet, I mean, because you know that you've dated girls and you meet them and it's like, whatever. But you meet that girl and that's what the mind starts doing. It's you start taking these steps. You start because courting is a balancing act where two people are coming together and you come together and it's like a little game. And I don't mean that negatively. It's a positive game. And you get closer and you get physical and then you start talking about things and she shares her life with you. You share your life with her. You get to know her life. She gets to know your life, your friends, your family. You start thinking about doing things together and planning things together. And then you go from there to let's have kids together and then let's grow old together. I mean, you go through you build up the scenario in your mind about what's going to happen in your future. And it's so fascinating realizing you get to live the rest of your life with this wonderful match that God has given you.
Right. Especially when you have that mindset and you put it like that, it's a permanent mindset that she is the one. And then all of a sudden she leaves. You're like, well, that means no one. Right. So they get really like, oh my God. Now, so what was the very first, as you were reading books and stuff like that, what was the first thing did you kind of analyze your entire relationship going kind of like piece by piece, or what did you first kind of realize?
This has nothing to do with my relationship. I do have it in the book, but it's a minor part of the book. No, this was okay. So
no, not the book, but like when you started, before you even wrote the book or anything, like what were you started realizing, I guess, what was the first thing that you started going like, oh, wow.
After we broke up, one of the things that I did was I started reading the relationship books. First book I read, Men and Women Are from Different Planets. And by the way, I've discovered that men and women are actually from the same planet, but that's another story. But men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and I started reading these books.
Yeah.
And because again, now I'm in research mode. I was doing that to gather research. I read 24 relationship books. And the only illogical books that I read were the relationship books. They were really tough to get through because my rest of my world was reading about Hitler and Martin Luther King and Bill Gates and J.D. Rockefeller and all of these other examples. What I do in my book is I use examples throughout history as analogies in relationships. For example, when I go through and break down the steps that lead to argument, one of the steps is a prejudice. Mom and dad got divorced. You now have a fear. That's an insecurity. But you develop a prejudice about marriage based on your experience before that's not thought out. It's a prejudice. And it turns out that what you were talking about, Ricardo, is prejudices. Prejudices are our mental problems. I'm not good enough. These are thought processes that are not, and that's all I'll say to myself. I'm not good enough. I won't go because I did this. But what about when I did that? That was good. I don't have that conversation with myself like you do in mature discussion. So I've got it's probably the only book I've ever written that's got a Martin Luther King section right next to a Hitler section. So I'm using these stories as examples to demonstrate points I'm trying to make. It's all the reason why relationships are successful is because couples get along. The reason why relationships are unsuccessful is because couples don't get along. There's your big reveal, by the way. That's a profound. It's so simple. It's not complicated.
Yeah.
And then what?
No, it's funny because I think the last time we were talking, one of the things that we started saying is like, we're just saying things that are just common sense. It's not even, we're not saying anything crazy. It's just like, it's right there the whole time, except it was a different perspective on it, you know?
I have a whole section on common sense. Common sense is the foundation of a successful relationship. Not only that, common sense, when you understand the real deep Carl Jung stuff I get into, common sense has a very significant influence on our state of mind.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but the point I'm making is I get into conflict resolution. What I do is I make couples consciously aware of how to approach conflicts. That's the example of the wars in governments and in capitalism and all of these other examples that we have to demonstrate different sorts of relationships to convey a point on what is successful and what is not successful, and then why is it not successful, so that we can learn to go the successful path instead of the unsuccessful path. It's such a big eye opener, but when that light bulb goes on, because the answer to the problem is equality. That is the answer. We're trying to figure out how to build partnerships. Men used to be in charge. And then in the 60s, for the first time in history, women were educated and able to get jobs. That is it. That is the entire conversation on what changed. Our divorce rate in the 50s and earlier was single digits, and then it skyrocketed in the 60s to the 50%. Simply because women are questioning their subordinate role in a patriarchy marriage, as they should. Because when you understand the psychology of a relationship, you understand freedom only occurs when it's based on equality. When it's based on inequality, then somebody's got to be in control.
Yeah. At the same time, so there's this big fight about being too equal. I mean, obviously there's some parts where it's never going to be equal.
Hang on a second, Francis. That's somebody that doesn't understand what equality is.
I guess what I mean is, like, for example, the perspective. Like, there's some people, it's basically what their perspective is on the situation. So, for example, like someone that back in the day, right, one of the consequences of women going out to work is not the lack of two parents being, or a parent being at home, and our kids are actually living less healthily because no one's at home, because both parents are working, right? So the consequences, no one's looking at that, but people are going like, oh, but equality, I'm the parent, and this, like, well, you forgot about the kid. So now we're gonna have some fucked up kids in the future because their mental health is not gonna be great because the parent wasn't there because they got babysitters all day long. So that's what I mean about equality. Like, it's your perspective on it. Like, because your perspective is like, oh, I'm being treated as not equal because I'm at home cooking. It's like, do you know how valuable that is? How much do you love your kid? So it's like, that's what I mean about, like, it depends what their perspective on what equality actually is, you know?
And that's what I'm talking about.
Effort? Are you putting in the same? So that's what I mean.
Hang on, Ricardo, hang on a second.
Yeah.
The only thing I ever read about equality in the relationship books is exactly the issue you just said, behavioral equality. That is not equality. Equality is not you do the dishes 50% of the time and she does it. That's not equality. That is not what equality is. Freedom. Equality. But let me explain that in more. Here's the business partnership example. Okay, you and I are business partners. We're not supposed to be the same person. That's a short-sighted business opportunity because we're going to do the same thing. What about the other stuff that needs to be done? In fact, the example that I use, if you're familiar with the two co-founders of Microsoft, Bill Gates, we all know about, but there's Paul Allen, very big beard. He died recently. And not that money's supposed to buy you happiness, but he never got married. I think he lived with his mom for a long time. And the point I'm making with that is Paul Allen was the engineer. That was his skill set. Yeah. Bill Gates was the sales guy. That is his skill set. Okay. When they built that business, those two came together. No skill sets complemented each other. That is equality. Equality is the man has his skill set. The woman has her skill set, because remember, the goal is individuality. That is the ultimate goal.
And that, so we're on the same page, and that's what I meant. Like, except some people just have a different version of equality. It means the same. You know, it's like
exactly. But you have your skill set, I have mine. If I'm good at doing the dishes and I love doing the dishes, I'm going to do the dishes. If you're good at balancing the checkbook, you balance the checkbook. If we both hate cooking, we do it together or we order out. That's working together as a partnership.
Right. Right. It's when they think of it as like, hey, yeah, but you're doing. It's like, yeah, it's completely different though. Our skill sets, our everything is so completely different. So I'm on totally on board with that. Yeah.
Let me explain what I mean by that.
Mm.
Where there are no distinctions, there can be no superiority. Perfect equality affords no temptation for abuse or control. Because all we are trying to figure out, because again, remember, the issue is control. Men used to be in charge. It was defined. Men only did the thinking. Men controlled the finances. Women were subordinate. They took care of the kids. They were responsible for the emotional side. Logical, emotional. These are the two sides of a clearly defined marriage where they both did separate roles. This barrier is crumbling. This is what we're trying to figure out how to get through, where both of us have equal access to be able to do both the thinking and the feeling in the relationship. That's mental equality. In fact, here's one of the things that I realized. I'm not gay, not that there's anything wrong with it, as Jerry Seinfeld so famously said, but I realized that for me to be a fuller man, I have to be in touch with my emotional side. And there's not a damn thing wrong with that. Yeah. I am not weak because I have emotions, and it's about damn time that the culture quit permeating that mentality that if a guy shows feelings, it's a weakness, because that is regressing men, and that is the wrong way to approach life. And in fact, how are we supposed to relate with our women unless we have an emotional side that we can understand? And that's something they're probably better at, so they could teach us if we're working together as a partnership.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, and it's I always look at that. It's like, it's really, like I've said before, it always comes down, from what I've seen, it always comes down to people's perspectives almost all the time. Your book, all it's really doing is hopefully changing people's perspectives on relationships, mindset, from emotion to mindset or to mental, right? So every time, that's always the case. Even what you're proposing about equality, it always comes down like, well, what's your perspective on that? If you think you're a subordinate because you do this, it's like, well, you're always going to have a problem because your perspective on it is.
But that's a self-esteem issue. That's not an understanding of equality issue. People that have low self-esteem can never see themselves eye to eye. And that's where then you get into the manic depressive roller coaster where they don't think they're good enough and then they think they're better. They don't think they're good enough and they think they're better. That's the way their mind oscillates back and forth whenever people have that imbalanced mindset. It's so amazing how a couple opens up each of the individuals to who they are. And when they understand that the goal is to make conscious what is unconscious, or else it appears as fate. Or put another way, the goal is not to find love. That is easy. The goal is to find the barriers that we've built inside of ourselves to be able to open up to experience love. That is the journey. That is the quest. And when couples understand that that is the goal, when they get together and there's conflicts that are emotional, that are struck a nerve, there's a fear behind that versus a logical disagreement, then that's when you do the soul searching and, quite honestly, become kind of mini therapists for each other. You have to create a judgment-free zone in the marriage so that both are comfortable bringing up things that they may not be comfortable bringing up if they think the response of their partner is going to be from a judgmental perspective and think lesser of them. If they don't have that judgment concerns, then it's a comfortable environment to be able to raise these issues from our background and to be able to comfort each other. There's nothing that will grow a couple closer together than both of them going through one of those spiritual transformations together, holding hands, crying on each other's shoulders, because there's always pain before a child is born. It's always painful to go through those enlightening experiences, but to do it together, they grow so much closer when they go through that together.
Right. So is there any thing that you can recommend, basically, because before marriage even happens, the dating has to happen first, right? So that's like the first step. Are there any things that you should do, or kind of, I guess, more aware of? Like, what's your perspective on that when you're just starting the relationship? Is it basically the same thing, you just keep doing it throughout the marriage, or is there something that's kind of a little different when you're just dating?
Well, the beginning is new because you don't know who each other is. That's the exciting part. The exciting part, the energy, is the curiosity of getting to know what you can learn from that other person. But remember, the real question you're asking is when conflicts come up. And if that's at the beginning or at the in the marriage or whenever, like the girl with the argument over the luggage at the airport.
Right.
If people can be prepared for that experience and how to handle that experience, and again, that's where I teach people, what are you afraid of? And turn the conversation back. If I'd have known that at the airport, and I could have looked at her and said, well, what are you afraid of? And then she could have spilled her guts to me. Well, whatever it is you said, and you're not respecting me, or whatever these issues, and we could have had a logical conversation. But that's not the way those conversations happen. They take off and they go emotional. Each of us are trying to defend ourselves. But if you can be prepared and be conscious, because that's what we're doing, is we're making relationships conscious. And what that means, when you are aware of what is the key to a successful relationship, then you have the free will to determine whether or not you want to keep moving in that direction.
Yeah.
Because you may get to know her or him and not like him.
Yeah, because it's funny, with that scenario, all she had to do is really forgive you. But it's like, did you it's the like, do you want to stay with them or not? Are we going to do this together or not? It's like, well, then forgive the guy.
Yeah, but again, all it was a misunderstanding of the conversation on the luggage. It was such a small, simple, stupid thing.
Right. Both have completely different perspective on the same situation. And that's what I tell people. Like, that's all really perspective is. You're not changing the situation, but it's really just a different perspective on the same exact situation, and that can really mess you up. So when you're not in the same, have the same perspective, or at least understand a different perspective, you're gonna butt heads, man. And then it's gonna be, until you change someone else's perspective, or you go to the same perspective, it's always gonna be a clash. Like what's happening now with politics. Like, it's just like you know. And one great advice someone told me, he's like, don't win the argument. You want to win the person. Do you love them? Do you want to stay friends with them?
Right.
And then you got to explain it right. And the same thing when I put in entrepreneurship with mental health, I'm like, you don't get mad at investors because they didn't invest in you. You just might have not explained it well enough.
Right.
So it's never their fault, that. Like, you have to be more accountable with all the things that's happening, because the more you blame, and it's just like, all right, well, it's not really going to help you.
But that is the other part of it. If we were to make conscious and make aware what you're trying to communicate, which is be aware of you as an individual entity going through this growing process that we all go through. And so you could look at, because when I get in those situations, I'm always reflecting to myself, always. Whenever something happens that goes wrong, I'm always, what did I do? What did I do? I'm always, maybe that's an insecurity of mine and I'm blaming myself. But to me, it's always been, what is the lesson and where are we supposed to go from here with that lesson?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's already the past, and you always want to try and learn from the past. That's what the past is for, just like, you're a freaking analyst. So everything really you're learning from is the past, and you base the future on that, right? So
the Chinese have a saying that history is a mirror.
History is a mirror. Huh.
Chinese have a saying that history is a mirror.
Why do they say that?
Because that's who you are. Your history is who you are.
I see what you're saying. Gotcha.
And it's not just individual history, but it's also cultural history.
See, I'm gonna have to kind of dispute that, because there was this one book, Personality is Impermanent, right? And because people think they're basing who they are on the past, that's why it's hard for them to be a different future. If you could just see yourself as a different person in the future, the past almost becomes irrelevant. You're just supposed to just learn from it. It's kind of like a startup, right? A startup is nothing right now, but people don't start it because, oh, this is totally going to fail. Like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I even starting this business? No one's going to use this app. If you have that mindset and then you're still starting it, it's weird. But that's what we do to our personal selves, right? Like, I'm not going to get that girl. I'm not even good enough. I'm this. Like, what am I doing? Because you don't see a future version of yourself that can actually get that girl. So you don't do the things that's required to be able to get that girl. So when you keep going and looking at it as a mirror in the past, then that's all you're ever going to be, is who you were from the past. But we're constantly evolving.
That's missing the whole point of the conversation. In fact, they have shown that when people ignore the past, they disassociate with who they are, and they have real serious mental problems.
Well,
I'm
ignoring and
talking,
learning is completely different.
that's exactly what that's my point.
Right, but you're not, because a
History is our
mirror,
best
you're saying
teacher.
I am who I was based on my
That's not what I'm
past.
saying. What I'm
You know
saying
what I
is
mean?
history is the best teacher. You are
Yeah,
who
yeah,
you are
yeah.
because of your history. That's what I'm saying.
That's what I mean. It's like it's when you don't have a future mindset, that's when you get in trouble because
I'm
you're
saying the same thing
depending
you
too
are,
much
Ricardo.
on history.
We're saying the exact same thing. I'm saying you know where you're going
Yeah,
when you realize, listen, I'm on my 5th career. I've lived in 7 cities in my adult life.
yeah,
It's taken me decades to figure out, as I'm playing this chess match called life. God had me working on Wall Street in the 90s, making a ton of money.
yeah,
Now he's got me in the marriage business. Where is this character taking me? I have no idea. I just know
yeah,
that he's got my best interest at hand, and I give it up to him to let him take me where he wants to take me. That is when
yeah,
you realize that you're going someplace, and all of these things that I've done in my past are all building blocks to making me who I am today, to better me, because I'm going to change the entire culture of marriage in this country. I have a
yeah,
huge, significant responsibility on my shoulders. I've got the
yeah.
weight of the world on my
Well,
shoulders when it comes to my goal in life, on what I want to achieve. And I know that I've got a background that gives me the skill set that allows me able to go out and take on the entire industry. I'm going to take on the entire psychology industry when they realize the
yeah.
depth of what I'm talking about, because they're
So
still stuck in Freud's mode.
yeah. So that's the biggest difference that I've seen. This is what's consistent is because what you're really talking about, it's not actually a goal, it's more a purpose because your sense of purpose is what's really guiding you. And the
Yeah,
purpose is never past based, it's more the future based.
yeah,
And that's the beautiful thing about purpose because it doesn't give a shit about what your past was, pain, pleasure, it doesn't care. It just all it cares about purpose. The problem is that a lot of people develop purpose wrong. They don't know how to. They think it's a noun, it's about themselves. So that never works out. Like, I want to be the richest man in the neighborhood. Well, that's not a purpose because a purpose actually benefits other people almost all the time. It has to benefit people. That's why you're so passionate about, like, I need to tell people about what I know to save marriages and divorce. It's not about you being rich off the thing. It's like, it's about curing the divorce and all that stuff. So at least that's what it should be, right? So that's one of the biggest things people don't understand, because what purpose does, it's obviously everyone knows it's your why, right? A lot more people nowadays know it's your why you're doing it and all that stuff. And because from there, you have to kind of see your perspective, whether it's going to be a threat or a benefit to your purpose. And that's where it all leads to. So when you have this sense of purpose, you almost don't even look at what happened in the past. Doesn't even care what your relationships were, how many relationships were, how bad they were. Doesn't even matter, because you're like, all right, now I have a freaking purpose. And it doesn't even care, but you should learn from what you've gone through, obviously. But that is really what's guiding you to do everything that you've done. And that's really what kind of keeps you going, because it's the beauty of purpose. It's infinite. Telling people about or teaching people the benefits of how to have a great relationship, a happy relationship. That's never ending. It's never going to be like, finally I achieved it. Like, no, there's always going to be new relationships. There's always going to be new kids growing up. So it's infinite. And that's the beauty of purpose. It's that what Simon Sinek refers to as infinite mindset, right? Because we're constantly evolving. Tim today is not Tim 5 years ago, guys.
right.
And I'm telling you right now, 5 years from now, this is not going to be the same Tim again, based on his experiences and whatever else happens. And if you are, that's not a good thing. And that's when people really that are depressed, they actually become, they limit themselves. And that's the biggest problem that I see also, like with the relationships, is because they go like, well, I'm that way. And it's like, yeah, but you're telling yourself you're that way. Because I'm Aquarius. That's why I'm like this, Tim. Like, I don't know about that, because this guy did some studies on like different personalities and about, how we're constantly evolving and stuff. And the ones that are not evolving is because they keep telling themselves they're just limiting themselves. But there's really no proof of that. You see people all the time. Elon Musk you can tell he's very introverted, but now he's on TV all the time. He's out there talking to him. So should he have just stayed by the computer the whole time? Look at you. Your job is an analyst. And now you're talking about relationships.
Right. But here's, in fact, Carl Jung has a beautiful discussion in his autobiography about what he calls fate.
Yeah.
And it really defines the way I view what I do. He discusses about how it's not in his control. It's in God's hands. And the way he describes it is so poetic
Yeah.
that he is beyond time. Because one of the most important things that we're supposed to learn as an adult is patience. And
Yeah.
that's a very, very difficult thing for most people to learn. But when you realize that life is already there in front of you, as long as you keep pushing forward,
Yeah.
because that's one of the, just so you know, talking about this a little more philosophically, there's been
Yeah.
a debate that's been going on for thousands of years of free will versus God's will, with the notion of God's will helped in the monarchy structure where your birth determined who you were through your whole life. It supported that, but this notion that God has got everything mapped out in front of you versus free will, which is we're as individuals to make our own decisions. The answer to the question, by the way, and I've answered it, is I have the free will to believe in God's will. And what that means is if I go by the rules, then I can do whatever I want. If I leave this call and go rob a bank, guess what happens to my free will? It goes away. And thinking about that from a fate perspective, if I want to go start selling drugs, God's not sitting back going, you should make a bunch. I can make a ton of money doing that. But that's not, that's why people are so messed. That's obviously, we're not going in that conversation. But what I'm doing is a good thing, which is what capitalism is supposed to be all about. Whatever you're doing in capitalism, even if you're staying at home raising your kids, there's not a damn thing wrong with the beauty of being able to, hey, I would give my right arm to be able to spend full time with my kids if I had a chance to. People need to appreciate all that stuff.
Yeah.
But when you put it into God's hands and realize that you got to keep pushing forward. You are the ones that's responsible for taking initiative. There's a reason why God makes us have to eat. If you think about the power of God, I've even thought this far. God did not need to make us have to eat. He could have created us in any way he wanted to. He did not need to make it so that live beings need supplements in order to be able to continue to live. He decided to do that. Why did he decide to do that? I cannot spend the next 7 days in bed. That is not going to advance my life. If I don't get up and do something, this is taking the initiative, pushing your things forward, getting out and doing what you need to do in order to create a life, which is, we all know that now. We all have jobs and education and all this stuff. We've been building on this for a long time. But we get into roadblocks, and then the issue is, how do you get through those roadblocks? And that's what you're talking about. These people that somehow think negatively about themselves use that as an excuse not to continue to live. People are the walking dead, unfortunately.
I have this one question that someone wrote, so I figured I'd put it up there for you.
Okay.
What about letting the past dictate and determine future relationships?
If it's positive, and here's the answer to that question is called stepping stones. That's what they are supposed to be for. If you get out of a relationship and you're doing this, oh, that other person, it's that other person. I didn't do a damn thing. I was such an angel. Oh my God, I was flying with wings on my shoulders. I didn't do a single thing wrong. It was so perfect. And then this idiot came and together. If that's how you approach the end of a relationship, you're missing the point. You're supposed to go, what is this stepping stone for? What am I supposed to learn by this relationship not working out? In fact, the guy that is kind of a mentor of mine, he's written a book that's called Why Is This Happening to Me Again? If he's in 80 relationships with 40 different girls, what's the common denominator in that scenario, right? Why do we have this habit of I'm an angel. Oh my God. Hey, do you see my wings in the back of my shoulders, by the way, Ricardo?
That's actually something, and I mentioned before, when you're just in a bad state of mind, you're not feeling great, you just have a bad perspective on things or whatever. You just hate accountability. It always happens, and just excuses are the best things. And that's what always happens. And that's why I don't like when people are getting fed different things that might increase the excuses. you know, oh, it's because you're from Venus and I'm from Mars.
Exactly.
That's why it didn't work out. And it's like when you put that in the best excuse, it's like, well, they're gonna use that excuse because they're not bad mindset. You know what I mean? So that I don't like when people do that, and it happens all the time in the mental health arena. You know that they blame depression rather than the cause of it, and it's just like, what does that mean?
But they're okay. Now I have to be careful with what I discuss. Okay.
Yeah.
There was maybe it was a year ago. There was a real pretty Kennedy. She was in her early 20s that died of a drug overdose.
Okay.
And so she was in the news a lot, and they actually had one of her social posts was, "I have been diagnosed with depression and realized that I'm going to have it for the rest of my life." One of the things that really, really upsets me about the psychology industry's labeling people is that they don't, it's like nobody has ever figured out what that other person's going to think about themselves when you are labeling them as a professional, particularly when it's not true.
Yeah.
You know, depression is not a disease. That is unbelievable that we are still going down this biological path in the 21st century. I can't believe, and I understand it financially.
Right.
For you to be able to convince somebody to go to therapy for years, yeah, it is funny, but it's not, because that's the motivation for not helping people, or to justify drugging people and this really shallow notion that it's going to somehow change your state of mind. I saw a psychiatrist on PBS a couple weeks ago. This guy was actually on PBS stating he can help people with the depression through their diet. Exactly. I'm like, how ridiculous is this industry going to take this biology conclusion to justify making money versus the reality is that's not true.
Yeah.
The mind controls the brain when you think, when you change your mind, when you make decisions, you have free will. It's about time that we get credited from the industry as being human beings and not animals. It's about time that they woke up to reality is that we have mental lives.
Right.
We have mental lives. In fact, in my book, I actually discuss what goes on up here. I help people understand what that communication is in their mind, what the source of the communication is, and how to change that communication so it's a productive communication. That's one of the things I teach people.
Yeah. Well, funny, now that we're talking about that, the biggest thing that I see, and I think it's the biggest, I always talk about perspective, right? And the biggest thing I have to change is people's perspective on mental health itself.
Yes.
And like you said, you already know. And like I said before, it's about the cause, not the result. Depression, anxiety, every emotion, even happiness, are just results. But you have to figure out what's causing that. The problem is that what I've seen is doctors, organizations, and society as a whole has now said the result is the cause. Depression is what, oh, Tim, you have depression. Shoot. Well, now you're going to be depressed. So now you're going to not let go and forgive your dad.
But no, but let me
tell you, you know.
Let me add to that though, because here's what you get. This is what, again, I got to be careful, but they won't say you have depression. They'll say you have depression because your brain is doing something.
Yeah. And again,
and I'm cognizant of this, and anybody watching this is going to be aware of this now. Think about this next time you hear any professional on any public stage talk about the brain. What does that have to do with my state of mind? What does the neuron and synapse have to do with who I am as an individual? What does serotonin and dopamine have to do with the way I live my life mentally? Absolutely nothing. It is the result of the way of my mental life, not the cause of my mental life. And the difference between those two is huge. Completely changes the direction of the whole industry.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I tell all the time when it comes to that conversation. When they bring up, you know, they basically say chemical imbalance. That's what you're referring to when they say it's the chemical imbalance. And I tell them, like, yeah, but you're under the assumption that the chemical imbalance is the cause, not the result. Because from what I've read is that the result from your stress response. Stress response, again, it's responding to the cause, and that's what's giving you that chemical imbalance. And there's also a positive, if balance means this, that means there's a positive imbalance also. So those are the people that are happy in this. People don't just have the happiness syndrome and go, I'm happy all the time. I've been happy since, like, I don't know, 2016 around. But people say it all the time where, I've been dealing with depression since like 2012. I mean, they know a date. It's insane. And they think, so you think you're never going to feel that depression ever again when someone passes away, loses a relationship, or you're just down and seeing a different future? Like, of course you are, because it's just an emotion. Whatever mindset you have, whatever you're doing, like obviously exercising and all that stuff, I get it that it works, it helps, but it always almost like stems from the mind, like you said, because I always consider, like, I try to compare physical and mental health, right? Physical health, there's diet and exercise. Well, it's the same thing with your mental health. I get that yoga works. I get that, meditation works. I get it. That's the exercise. But now let's talk about your mental diet. What are you feeding yourself in that?
Exactly.
Are you saying you're a loser? Are you saying the only way I'm valuable if my dad is finally proud of me? Because if that's your perspective, well, if one person is the only one that's going to give you value on this earth, well, we're going to have a problem until you change that.
But let me add something to that, though, because this is what I've discovered. Okay, and this really makes it really problematic. So think about, you impressed me, Ricardo. Is pretty happy. You're good with yourself, and I'm that way. Now again, like you said, I can't say since 2016. I helped like everybody else.
Yeah, exactly.
But so think about you being positive as much as you are, not 100% of the time, but you being positive as much as you are. People that are negative that often as well. Every day, this is what I experienced personally. Every day, they wake up looking for somebody. They wake up, and in fact, here's the way I've kind of summarized this.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it suck if you thought that everyone was out to get you only to discover that they were?
Yeah.
Think about that for a second. They think everybody's out to get them, and that's their life. That every day, it's exhausting.
Yeah.
So our former Surgeon General, C. Everett Koop, was once quoted as saying that 80% of our physical problems are mentally based.
Yeah.
Think about that for a second.
Yeah.
You want to be physically healthy, get your mind on straight.
Yeah. I know someone with no legs, just an arm and a finger, and he's stoked on life.
Exactly.
So I get it. And what's funny, again, I got to go back to perspective, because that's what it is. People that live like this, if they're watching, is they just have to have a different perspective on life. Like you mentioned before, there's negative and positive. It's always going to happen. In fact, it's actually required to have a fulfilling life. And this is what I mean. You'll never see a movie that has zero conflict and no, right? You're just never going to see a popular, riches to riches movie.
Yeah, exactly.
It's always about that. And so what I tell people, and the same thing, it's something just natural in life. Look what happens in sports, video games. The level of difficulty doesn't increase as you get better or as it gets more challenging. It increases. That's why everyone watches the Super Bowl, not the game that they all know. I know who's going to win, but that's the kind of life that you want, where you always just win. But I'm telling you, you're going to end up like a rock star that commits suicide because you think it's supposed to be like you just lose sight of things, and that you're not supposed to go through bad things in this. And it's really just based on your perspective, but it's actually a requirement to be fulfilled. That's why sometimes girls that are looking for, like, I just want a nice guy. Yeah, you dumped a lot of them.
Right.
You dump them, and it's because of that aspect. It's like you kind of need a little bit of that challenge, which I get. And if you don't learn from those, though, it's going to be in trouble. But yeah, it's funny.
It's the best thing about life. Again, I've been in 5 different careers. Okay, I've gone through a lot of changes.
Yeah.
Okay, and people think, that change is scary, or learning or problems are scary. But when you get through that tunnel, and you get to the light, and you get out of the tunnel, and you look back on the journey that you went on, you realize what you've learned and how much you've benefited from that. You realize the value of that experience. And so you look at these lessons positively. I've actually discovered the original Slaying Your Dragon story. Let me tell you this. This is pretty cool. Mm. This is the original Slaying Your Dragon story. Okay. The Sumerians in Mesopotamia invented civilization 8,000 years ago. Okay, that's where the story of Adam and Eve comes from, by the way. Adam and Eve invented irrigation in Mesopotamia. They were the first psychological human beings on Earth, not the first biological. But the point is most of the things that we know today got started with the Sumerians. 60 seconds to the minute, 60 minutes to the hour, 360 degrees was because of their number system based on 60. What's the season between spring and fall? It's called summer. That's because of the Sumerians. And they also, in fact, the original flood story was originally written by the Sumerians. Most of the stories from the Old Testament were originally written by the Sumerians, and they wrote the original Slaying Your Dragon story. That story has continued to this day to influence us. Mm-hmm. Okay? And what that story is supposed to teach us, this is what forgiveness does. The knight never dies when he slays the dragon. People die all the time when they don't slay their dragons. It's called suicide. But what's interesting about the original description, today it's a fire-breathing, tail-wagging, crocodile-looking creature that's scary and frightful, and you got this brave knight that's shivering and nervous, and he goes and slays the dragon. That's the image today. Yeah. But the original description was that it was like a caught ox. It's described, it's called the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's described as putting a rope through the nose of the ox. It is so painless, so neutral, so unassuming and unintimidating. And that's what happens on the other side of that journey. Ahead of time, you're looking at my parents destroyed my childhood. And I could literally I had the whole laundry list of all of the things that they did. This is when I finally forgave him, was the guy outdid me and he broke me down. I was like, well, he had it worse than I did. So maybe mine wasn't so bad. And that's what gave me that flicker of light that opened my eyes. And then finally it was like a flood going through that. And now that I'm through that process and I look back and I'm not a bad guy. In fact, I kind of think I'm kind of a good guy. I work hard. I got great work ethic. I try and I think I'm not so bad. I'm not, there's always better. There's always richer. There's better looking. There's always out there that's better. But I didn't do so bad. And why? Because of my parents. It's not me. Are you kidding me? Right. I will always be the son of a cab driver. Always. My whole life will be defined as I'm Floyd Kellis' son, and my dad was a cab driver my whole upbringing. I wasn't raised with money. In fact, I'm actually happy now that I wasn't raised with money because I understand the psychological challenge of separating from your childhood when there's the money thing that's being hung over you, like some stupid handcuff to keep you engaged with your parents. Parents keep their kids involved in their lives in very unhealthy ways because of the dollar sign all of the time.
Yeah, I agree.
And so now I look at the value of what that experience beforehand. My parents ruined my childhood. Oh my God, they were the worst parents.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But that's where a lot of it kind of comes from, right? It's
exactly. We are who we. All of us are who we are because of our parents and God. Those are the two people that get the report card. And God's is going to be all A's, right?
Yeah.
Parents is not.
Yeah. So, all right. So it looks like we're about that time. Any last kind of advice or maybe just a summary that you can kind of tell people about relationships?
Well, the best thing to do is be conscious of your relationship. And most significantly, be conscious of conflict. Again, Ricardo, I have a problem with you. Well, we're going to sit down and talk about it. It's going to be a conversation. And here's one real big piece of advice, okay, for guys. And girls need to understand this. Because we are not so good with emotions, when we have those negative emotions in our relationship, we more than likely shut down. And you don't want that. Once the guy starts shutting down, he loses his emotional attachments, he loses his empathy for his wife, he loses the emotional component to the marriage. That's what happens when there's a conflict that one is trying to control. Okay, which is what it's all about. So be conscious and aware of conflicts. Let's sit down. Let's talk about, particularly when you know what Ricardo and I have been talking about, your past, understanding it's mom and dad, or you were molested as a child, or whatever these things were. Now well, let's talk about that. Let's heal through that. Let's go through forgiveness. And you cry on my shoulder. I'm here to hold you. You're not going to, I always joke, is there any blood now? Is anybody bleeding? Anybody losing fingers, right? So just be aware that solving conflicts is the key to a successful relationship.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tim. I really appreciate you being a guest on our show. And I hope people that are watching this really got to learn a lot of value and get a lot of value from you. So thank you so much, man.
And just so you know, just an email address, Tim Kellis, TIMKELLIS @ happyrelationships, plural, happyrelationships.com. Tim Kellis @ happyrelationships.com. Feel free to email me. I have the marriage support group on Facebook if you want to join that as well. It's one of the ways that I interact with people as well. So listen, Ricardo, this was awesome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm glad. So if you guys need some kind of help or whatever, the website's right there, happyrelationships.com. And, there's a sign up form on there so you can come communicate with them. And then, and that's it. I hope everyone learned something valuable today. And thank you again, Tim. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Sounds good, Ricardo.
All right. Bye.